Hello and welcome to Geeky Bit. Today in tech history, we're going to talk about dual slot 1 motherboards. The first slot 1 motherboard was introduced around 1997 and it replaced the socket 7. While there was socket 8, it wasn't widely used in the consumer market space. The dual slot 1 motherboards seem to appear around the introduction of the 440BX chipset in 1998. There were both socket 8 and socket 370 adapters for slot 1 motherboards. Slot 1 motherboards had a front side bus of 66, 100, and 133 MHz, and 242 contact points for the CPU, and supported CPUs all the way up to 1400 MHz. It also used 168-pin DIMMs. So now that we know a little more about slot 1 motherboards, let's take a look at the dual slot 1 motherboard I have in action. Right here is the P2-2200 motherboard, and these are the PCI slots, AGP, and ISA slots. This right here is the 2 slots for our slot 1 motherboard, and this right here is all of the RAM, 2 sets for each CPU, and this right here is our 20-pin Molex connector, not 24-pin, and it certainly doesn't have a 4-pin CPU additional header. Yes, it runs 2 whole slot 1 CPUs off of just a 24-pin connector. And here we have it booted up. Take a listen to the CPU fan. It is not happy. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about my story with the first dual slot 1 motherboard I interacted with. It was late 1999 when I saw my first dual slot 1 motherboard. It was when I was still working part-time at a computer shop. While I was working one day, a man brought in the tallest tower computer I had ever seen. It must have been 4 feet of pure white. It was so massive, and inside it had 2 slot 1 slots on the motherboard. I was like, what? This man brought in this massive behemoth of a computer because he wanted the upgrade to have 2 CPUs. My boss and owner of the store at the time was there, and he tried to talk the man out of buying a second CPU. He tried to tell him that Windows 98 will only use 1 CPU. The man was very insistent though, leading my boss to cave and sell him another CPU. A few weeks had passed. The man came back in. He was so angry. He wanted to know why wasn't his computer faster. I told him, look, it's Windows 98. It only uses 1 CPU. And then I told him, you would have been better buying a faster CPU instead of a second one, like my boss told you in the first place. After some back and forth, he finally caved and bought a faster single CPU, returning his original second CPU he had purchased. It was of course a socket 370, and he needed a socket 370 adapter. He came in a few times after that. He always told us how happy he was with that second purchase. So here are my thoughts on dual slot 1 motherboards. Some people bought them thinking they were going to get a huge bump in speed and performance for their single-threaded workloads. Some companies even marketed dual slot 1 motherboards as slot 1 motherboards for gamers. I think dual slot 1 motherboards were great for server spaces as the second CPU was used. Of course, this board right here is the first I personally ever owned of a dual slot 1 motherboard style, and I think it would make for a great Windows 2000 system where both CPUs could be utilized while not in all workloads. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it, and if so, click that like button, and if you aren't subscribed so already, feel free to do so, and if you'd like to get notifications of my future videos, click that bell button.